Bueno, mírate encendido, te alabas a Jesucristo, sale bendecido.
Ministerio Radial Impacto, junto a Malaquías Reyes, presentan Impacto Cristiano. Nuestro propósito es hacerle partícipe del mensaje que Jesucristo es el mismo ayer, hoy y por todos los siglos, y que solamente a través de él su vida puede ser transformada e impactada por su gran amor y poder salvador. Desde este momento, con ustedes, Malaquías Reyes en Impacto Cristiano.
Good morning. This is Mike Reyes once again. Welcome you to Impacto Cristiano en la Comunidad. Today we promise you to have an excellent, awesome program. We are going to be talking about the death penalty, and I have a very special guest, besides being a very close friend of ours, of mine and the family. She is very involved in these topics, and we are. She just came out of Geneva, a Geneva Convention, let's put it that way, on human rights, and we are going to be touching over the topic of the death penalty. Why the death penalty, and why this topic is so important to her, and I think why it should be important to you, the viewer. So just relax, lay back, get your popcorn or whatever you drink, and enjoy the ride. So having said that, I wanted to welcome Sandra. Sandra Jones, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Good,
Thank you for having me today.
Thank you for being here today. And I also wanted to excuse ourselves with the viewer because we did have a video presentation, but due to some technical difficulty from my part, I think I kind of recorded on the wrong format, so we can't present it to you. But the piece that we was going to present was Professor Sandra Jones at the Human Rights Convention, speaking on defense to abolish the death penalty. But we're going to do that live. So since we have her here, I'm going to ask her some questions, and we're going to get the information right from the source. So with that, I want to welcome her again. And Sandra, first of all, after you introduce yourself to the public, I would like to know why this topic of the death penalty is so important to you.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Sandra Jones, and I am a sociology professor at Rowan University, and I have been focused on the movement to abolish the death penalty for 2 decades now. As an activist and as an academic, my research is focused on this topic because I was raised in Virginia in the South, in the Southern Baptist Church, and the Southern Baptist Church, as many people know, has a position that is pro-life when it comes to the issue of abortion, yet they are the only Protestant denomination that has a formal position in support of the death penalty. And so being raised in that environment, that never sat well with me. It felt hypocritical. If we're going to be pro-life, God doesn't choose which lives are valuable. All lives are valuable. So I felt that that hypocrisy, particularly being raised by a mother who's very compassionate and forgiving and loving and represents the forgiveness and loving aspect of the God that I was raised to believe in, made me very opposed to the death penalty as I got older and I learned about it. And I felt that, I don't know, maybe in a way I'm sort of making up for my background and my past and doing the work to try and see that the death penalty is abolished.
Tell us, as I just informed the public, that you just came from Geneva. So tell us a little bit about what we were about to see on that video. That
Yes, the Human Rights Council at the United Nations in Geneva every year has various topics that they present around the issue of human rights. And each year the Quaker United Nations organization takes on a particular issue of social justice to present at the Human Rights Council. And so this last year, 2012, they took on the topic of children of the incarcerated. And then this year they decided to zero in more specifically on children of death row inmates or children of the executed, to bring the needs that this community, these children have, to international level. So in February, this actually was my second time going to Geneva. The first time this year I went in February because they invited 14 of us who work around the world with death row inmates and their children. And it's not like we were selected out of hundreds of people, there's just very few people doing it.
Right.
So I was there in February doing like a think tank sort of thing, workshop with the other 13 of my colleagues who do this work around the world. And we collaborated together and got our notes together about the particular needs of these children. And we presented our findings before the United Nations in February. And they were so excited about that. They invited myself and a couple of others to come back in September. So actually on 9/11, September 11th this year, I was at the United Nations in Geneva speaking before the Human Rights Council, and the venue was quite a large one. It's the big main circular room in the building, and every country had the potential to be present, either diplomats, ambassadors, and we had so we had this international forum to bring to the attention people around the world the needs of children of death row inmates, because the death penalty does not just affect the people sitting on death row. The people on death row have family members, have children, parents, siblings, who all are impacted by this because they love the person, their loved one who sits on death row.
You did mention on the video, as I was watching, one particular case that happened here in Delaware, and what really struck me was the fact that his father was on death row, and I guess he got executed.
Yes.
And then you went on to tell us about what that caused on him, because you just mentioned something that I think is important for the viewer to be informed about.
Absolutely. I think it's important to note that with incarcerated individuals in general, much less on death row, but certainly on death row we see it even more exacerbated, we might be creating another generation of offenders because of the children being so impacted by their father's incarceration and eventual execution. The case that you're referring to happened in 2001 in Delaware when Abdullah Hameen was executed. And he had established a beautiful relationship with his son from behind bars that perhaps had not been at that level before he was incarcerated. But Mr. Hameen had been on death row about 10 years, and during those 10 years, early on during his incarceration, he had this transformation and became a devout Muslim, and was respected and loved by not only fellow inmates, but by the guards who worked with him, who I understand many of them were in tears when they brought him to the death chamber when he was executed in 2001. So his son, who often was referred to as Little Hameen, Abdullah Hameen's son, was 19 when his father was taken from him after building this 10-year relationship with his father. And I'll never forget the pardon board hearing that I attended, which happens within days prior to an execution. And this is the last attempt that a death row inmate and his family and his legal representation have to appeal for saving his life. And I'll never forget his son taking the stand and saying, "Please don't kill my father. He means the world to me, and I don't know what I'd do without him." And it was after his father's execution, he became initially suicidal and attempted suicide and was institutionalized for that a couple of times. And then soon after that, was arrested for homicide.
Wow.
And so now he sits in the Pennsylvania correction system doing life without the possibility of parole.
Wow.
Yes, so he was 23 by the time his sentence took effect, and I suppose he's in his close to mid-30s now, because this has been 2001.
And I know this is a very sensitive topic because we do have two sides. And I'm pretty sure that how long you been advocating for?
A couple decades, about 20 years.
20 years. And you look very young.
Thank you.
But what would you say? And I know you probably have been confronted, by a family of victims. How do you address that?
The other side.
Yes.
Well, I certainly, first you need to share with people on the other side that you understand their feelings, and you can't discount the pain and agony that murder victims' family members feel when they've lost a loved one, or people who are concerned about the impact. Right. And so when you validate that pain and that sorrow, and then help them see that, regardless of how they feel towards the person who murdered their loved one or the loved one of someone they care about, those individuals have family members as well, and they have people who love them as well. And since there's been no valid study that's been found to argue that the death penalty offers a deterrent, in fact, the states that exercise executions and have the death penalty have a higher murder rate than those states that do not. So it's been pretty well established that the death penalty is not a deterrent to future crime.
Come back. You mean that the death penalty is not a deterrent? Is that we have a higher
Absolutely.
rate of crime on state that have the death penalty?
Absolutely, and in fact, you can even break it down to the counties that draw the most murderers to death row or have the highest rates of execution. Even those counties, in fact, Dallas and Harris County in Texas draws the most people. And Texas, we all know, is a high executing state.
Yeah, it's the highest.
And they have been executing people recently, and even though executions have dropped across the nation, even in Texas, they remain higher in Texas than anywhere else. But if you look at Harris County, the county that pulls the most cases that go to death row, it also has a higher murder rate. So, and we now have, most recently with Maryland, are abolishing the death penalty, 17 states that do not have the death penalty, and those states, if you look at the statistics, have a lower murder rate. So it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense in terms of deterrence. It doesn't make sense in terms of cost, because unlike the common belief, it's more expensive to have the death penalty than to have a life sentence, because of the costs associated with the capital trials and the costs associated with secure housing units. But more importantly to me, in fact, all of these other statistics aside about how it's not effective and it's too expensive, it creates more victims. And I'm not suggesting that all of the children of death row inmates wind up in jail for murder, as Abdullah Hameen's son did, for them to no less be impacted by their father's incarceration and eventual execution. There are others who are impacted in different ways. Perhaps they are stunted in their development, or I know a young woman whose father's on Delaware's death row now, who made a decision to put her college career aside so that she could throw herself into her father's case and be there for him and advocate for him. It takes a lot of time for these families to do this.
Do you feel, or have you doing an investigation on the victim? Do they get closure when somebody is?
That's a good question. Some victims' family members claim to have closure when their loved one's murderer is executed, but there have been studies that have been put forth that offer that that's not the case.
That's not the case.
And not just studies, there are real life stories of people who talk about how they felt that didn't do for them what they thought. And I have to, while we're talking about victims' families, I have to make the point there are victims' family members who are opposed to the death penalty. In fact, there's two organizations, Murder Victims' Families for Reconciliation and Murder Victims' Families for Human Rights. And they have, there's a collection of family members who lost loved ones to murder who are emphatically opposed to the death penalty because they know that it's going to create more victims like their own family and the capital defendants' family members. And they don't want their loved ones' murder to be used as a rationale to support more grief and more loss. It's very similar to the 9/11 wives. I don't know if you are familiar with this group. After the terrorist attack on 9/11, there was a group of women, although I'm sure there were some men, but primarily women who got together, who formed an organization to oppose the preemptive war against Iraq, saying, not in our name. Don't do this in our name. Yeah.
Exactly.
So there are murder victims' family members.
And Professor Sandra Jones, she's a professor of sociology at University of Rowan University in New Jersey, right? And being so young, I think you was one of the youngest one to obtain the tenure on that university, if I'm not mistaken.
Not really, believe it or not. No,
fairly young though. And she is writing a book, which is coming out pretty soon. So can you tell us about the title and what is that book all about?
Okay, I appreciate that. Yeah, I have a book coming out. It'll be early December, and the title is Grief, Loss, and Treatment for Death Row Families, and the subtitle is Forgotten No More. And what I do with this book, and it's in press now, so it's due to be out in a couple of months. What I do with this book is I gather data from the family members of Delaware's death row inmates here, so it's very germane to our state, yet it could certainly be used as a case study to apply to death row families across the country, in our nation, I should say. So I track from the time of arrest to execution and beyond what these family members and their stories they've shared with me, the impact upon them, their grieving process. It's a highly unique grieving process, unlike any other, because they're highly stigmatized for having a loved one on death row, so their grief is not recognized. And so it's been a term used that's called disenfranchised grief, has been used to refer to communities where their grief is not seen as valid or legitimate. People don't appreciate the fact, particularly those who are pro-death penalty, but people who maybe haven't given the subject much thought, that they're these quote-unquote monsters sitting on death row who are so thoroughly demonized by the media actually have people in their corner who love them. So, and it exacerbates and complicates their grief in that they socially isolate themselves from the rest of the community. They are, as a result of their stigma, and they are not given the social support that most of us need when we lose a loved one. I mean, contrasting, you mentioned the murder victims' family members. When somebody is murdered and that case is put on the news, it's not unusual for strangers to send cards and flowers and to show up at vigils with people they've never met before.
Right.
But can you imagine when your loved one's about to be executed, strangers, people you've never met before, are calling for the death of your loved one and putting editorials in the paper saying, kill the monster, and they don't even know your loved one. So it's quite the opposite experience with death row family members. And so in this book, I explain this process of grieving, but I also, at the end of each chapter, as I move the reader through the grieving process, I offer clinical interventions that mental health professionals, because I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, and before I worked at Rowan as a professor, I did, for 12 years, I did mental health and substance abuse counseling. and I had done some grief counseling, and I recognized the lack of information that therapists receive about these families and their grieving process. So I offer throughout the book ways that mental health professionals can help the families through the grieving process.
Are you available for probably churches or organizations that are interested in this topic?
Sure. Yes.
To make a presentation?
Yes, I'm more than welcome. If anybody has any concern about how to help these families, how to help the children, like it was quite daunting actually to be at an international level with easily a couple of hundred people from around the world passionately caring about this subject. You know, it's not what I'm used to. Unfortunately, there's a neglect of these families in our nation, but to go to Geneva, there is, if people are interested, the video that you referred to is available at the United Nations website. So if they go to the website and they go into the archives and they look for 9/11, the Human Rights Council, it's a 3-hour video. And for those who are passionate about this subject or interested, maybe just want to see what people are saying around the world, if you click on the link to the webcast that was recorded that day, you'll see me speak, but you'll see other panelists speak, and you'll also see people, easily 30, maybe more of those in the audience have an opportunity, 2 minutes each, to raise their comments and questions, and overwhelmingly, almost everyone who spoke said, well, I think we need to make sure the death penalty is abolished.
How are we ranked around the world as far as the death penalty? Because I know, what is our ranking?
We are one of the 5 nations that execute the most. And the company we keep are Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, China.
Wow.
The people we commonly like to call, axes of evil or, having bad politics, that's the company we keep when it comes to the death penalty.
So we're ranked 5th?
I don't know if we're 5, but we're among those 5. I would say we're even above some of those, but we're among the top 5. And Europe, none of those nations have the death penalty, and even other places that do are issuing moratorium legislation. For instance, the diplomat from Thailand said, we are trying to abolish the death penalty in Thailand. We have moratorium legislation.
What is the hope to see the death penalty be abolished here in Delaware?
There are efforts now trying to do that with the Delaware Repeal Act, and that's been tabled. It was introduced in the spring, and it was tabled, and we are not sure exactly when it's going to be looked at again, but I think that there is a good possibility that we may join our neighboring states. It wasn't that long ago New Jersey abolished the death penalty, just several years ago, and now last year Maryland. I know Pennsylvania is trying to introduce moratorium legislation. So, our neighbors around us are abolishing the death penalty, and we need to, think about that if we want to join them or if we want to continue with others.
Do you have a number? Do you know how many people do we have right now in death row in Delaware?
I think it's approximately 20. It might be 18. It's somewhere between 18 and 20.
And their ages? They rank?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. The youngest is in his 20s, very young.
There's a reason why, and I'm not advocating that, but there's a reason why there's not too many female on death row, or none?
There's none in Delaware, and nationwide we have over 3,000 death row inmates, somewhere around 3,200, and we only have about 55 of those are women. Now there may be a couple more who have been added to that, up to 60. Women simply don't commit murder at the same rate as men. That's one factor, but perhaps they're given more leniency based on mitigation evidence that's offered on their behalf. There are some very high-profile cases like Carla Faye Tucker out of Texas.
Good. I know that we only have like 2 minutes left. Okay. I know there was a law that just passed, maybe you may have a graph. Those individuals that committed crime when they were a teen, so give us a little bit about that.
That was the summer before last, the summer 2012. The Supreme Court abolished juvenile life without the possibility of parole. In 2005, with Roper v. Simmons, I believe, there was a case that abolished the death penalty for those who were juveniles. So we've gotten rid of that as recent as 2005, where if you were a juvenile at the time of the crime, you can't be on death row. And now we are no longer able to send juveniles to jail without the possibility
So
of
will that
parole.
affect some of the juvenile that we already have on death row? Adults
Not death
now?
row. We don't have because of the 2005. We don't.
Yeah, well,
right.
but when they commit the crime, there was a juvenile.
Yeah, but like I said, in 2005, they abolished that for death row. Now,
row.
this recent legislation got rid of life without the possibility of parole.
Okay.
Those who are serving what we call LWOP.
Well, our
Yeah.
time is almost over, and time always flies when you're having fun, So we are gonna once again invite you to give us that website that they can watch.
Sure. I don't know the actual, but if you Google United Nations in Geneva, and when you find the link to the United Nations, go to the Human Rights Council
And they put
and look at the
9/11.
archives for 9/11.
Okay.
And then if you're interested in joining the movement, there are different organizations. There's the Delaware Citizens Opposed to the Death Penalty, and also the organization I'm affiliated with, which is the Campaign to End the Death Penalty. Their website is nodeathpenalty.org.
Okay. How often do you have meetings?
Well, we try to have them once or twice a month.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been a busy schedule this summer, so we're trying to get back to that.
All right. Well, this is your Sunday program. Your host, Mike Reyes, and today I am more than pleased to have Professor Sandra Jones, that just arrived from Geneva Convention. And our topic today, for those of you that came late, was on the death penalty. So I'm against the death penalty myself. So, and I think that every Christian should be against. It's a biblical concept, and I think we all should embrace it. So I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank Professor Jones and pretty soon we will inform you that she will be on our radio program for 2 hours, because we need to elaborate a little bit more about that. And if you want to be a part of it, we have the website or her email or whatever you got your email on. Yes, that you could go and get in touch with Professor if you want to invite her to your church or your organization to talk about this topic. Feel free. Thank you very much. Have a beautiful Sunday, and I'll see you next month.